Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Daniel Swedner. I'm the exhibition curator for Promega Corporation. And we are going to have a little discussion and talks by the artists for the current exhibition of African Connections, A Common Thread. And I want to start out by saying thank you to, obviously, to Promega and everybody here, and especially Bill Linton, who's, without him, none of us would be doing what we're doing, sitting here today. And also Stephanie Shea is sitting back at the boards, and she is instrumental in these programs. I spent the first 20 years without her, and I don't know how I did it. So thank you, Stephanie. And Nicole Hasselwander is also an integral part of that, and of course Penny Patterson. And I've also worked with Tim Rooney for the last couple of years to help me install, and we want to get him a little more involved. So thanks to all those people. And we have Joyce Owens and Jake Webster on the other side, and Charly Palmer here in the middle, that will be explaining themselves a little bit, I think. But the theme of this African Connections is a little, well, I'd say it's a lot self-serving for me, because the way that I got this project going in 1996 was with Francis Ngenda, and who was my mentor in the 70s, and then reconnected with him in the 90s in Nairobi and brought his work back here. And this was the original work that got this whole project started. And this is also the time when we have about 60 of Ngenda's paintings and a couple of sculptures. So there's a sculpture out in front that's been here since the beginning, because that sculpture was cut down. That's a black walnut, and it was cut down in the woods just north of here for Ngenda, and then it was taken back to Indiana, where I studied with him in the 70s, the sculpture house, and it was carved there. And it was at that point that I was having coffee, minding my own business, and there was this guy sitting at the next table. It was an old brewery, and we were sitting outside enjoying the day, and I looked over at this guy, and I just like, who is this guy? And so I walked over and introduced myself, and I said, "Are you an artist?" And one thing led to another. And so Jake Webster and I got to know each other because of Ngenda. So there's another connection there. And so another trip up here to Madison, before we did the show of his work here, we did a show at Indiana University and with Colfax Culture Center. So we bridged inner city culture center with the university, using Ngenda's work as that bridge. And so another trip up, there was more parts of that tree, so I loaded up some more in my truck and came back, and I gave these pieces to Jake Webster. And what you see here is in the exhibition. This piece was done from the same tree that sculpture by Ngenda was done. So it's literally a connection. We've ripped this tree apart and we're putting it back together, I think, as a connection there. And then my connection with Joyce and Charly is through another African connection, and I can thank Donna Page for that, working with Danny Simmons a few years ago. And he collects African art, and his work reflects his collections of African art. And it was the show we did a few years ago with that, and I met really through Facebook and phone conversations these two. So we have all these connections, and say the reason we're all sitting here right now is because of this. And I'm just really honored to, after 22 years, to still be up here doing this. I guess they'll have to drag me out of here. But in any case, I'm really proud of what we've done, and this to me is coming back to the roots of what I started doing and showing, how important Ngenda has been to my life, and I think to a lot of other people's lives. So with that, I'm going to let the artists explain themselves a little bit too. So you want to go first? Well, we'll cut you off. Well, this is Joyce Owens, and I feel like I've known her for years, but we just met.
In person.
In person,
We
right.
had a lot of exchanges. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's for us. Yeah.
That's for us,
Thank
yeah.
you.
And also with Charly, but I've known Jake now for 20 years, so
Wow.
so it's a pleasure. I'm really happy about this show. So thanks for coming, and we'll listen to what Joyce has to say.
Well, thank you for being here, and I was very pleased to be invited. And Charly and I have known each other for a while. We actually did a show together where we spoke together. What was that? 2 years ago? And we've done other projects together. Visions of Our 44th President, which is another story I won't get into right now. But it was a nationally known artists were included in this exhibition, and he and I were both in that. And Jake, I'm just meeting, but Facebook is a terrific way to connect with people, and I've connected with a lot of people through Facebook. And people have asked me, "Why are you on Facebook?" I said, "Because everybody else is." Yeah. So my name is Joyce Owens. I'm from Philadelphia originally. I've lived in not that many cities. I've lived in DC, where I went to undergraduate school at Howard University. I lived in Philadelphia, of course, and I lived in New Haven, where I went to grad school at Yale University, and now I live in Chicago. And I raised my children in Chicago, who are, one son actually works for Facebook. He does virtual reality. And the other son lives in LA. So the one son lives in Silicon Valley, and the other son turned into an artist behind my back. I did not know that he was going to be an artist. It just happened. And so he's making a living as an artist who is not teaching, who is not doing all the other things that artists have to do to make a living. He's making a living from it. He has to work a lot, but he's making a living. I was a curator for like 20 years. I taught at a university in Chicago. But my first love, people say, "Well, are you still making art?" I'm like, "I'm not dead." People say, or people might come to my studio or to my home. I have work everywhere, and people will say, "Oh, do you have a show coming up?" And I'll say, sooner or later, I get shows, But basically, I tell them I make art because I'm an artist. I don't make art because I have an appointment to be in something. I make art because I'm an artist. Now, the work that you've seen out here, you've seen some of my paintings. I'm a little bit everywhere. I'm interested in a lot of different things. So I started out in college, I started out in art education because my mother, who was an opera singer, said, "You have to be a teacher because since you want to be an artist, you have to be a teacher because otherwise you're not going to make any money." So I tried education, and it wasn't for me. So I switched to painting. Somebody told me I could switch to painting. I couldn't believe it. I said, you can get a degree in painting? And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, well, I guess I'll go for it." So I did that, and so I've learned to paint traditionally. If you'll see my my website. Let's see if I can get this up there. Okay. And I think I did it again. But anyway, these are rather traditional paintings, and these are from a series I do called Survivor Spirits. And a lot of times I'm inspired by things that I read. I like to read. I read as much as I can. But I read the stories of former slaves. In the 1930s, during the Depression, when Roosevelt was trying to put people back to work, he also put a lot of artists back to work. All kinds of artists, playwrights, film people, all kinds of people. I'm talking fast because I have 10 minutes. So what he did was he sent writers from New York City down south because somebody said, "You know what? Pretty soon, all the last living slaves are going to be dead, and we need to collect their stories," because they were collecting stories of other groups of people in the country. And so they said, "We know we need to collect their stories." They sent one very famous writer, Zora Neale Hurston. Their Eyes Are Watching God. I don't know if you know her, but she was a Harlem Renaissance writer. And so they sent these people down, and they were listening. They recorded the stories, but they also photographed them. They were writers, they weren't photographers. They photographed them. And I had a book, and I saw their stories, and I thought, I've got to paint these people. And the reason I wanted to paint them is because what I saw in them were the survivors of the fittest. They should have been dead for so many different reasons. I don't have time to articulate all the reasons, but I'm sure you can imagine that if you don't have medicine, we talk about, I won't get into politics, but anyway, we talk about everybody having health care. I'll just say that. And nobody had health care if you were a slave. The food was bad. I think gumbo came out of that though, so that was good. But the treatment was bad. And I read these stories, and there was this one lady who ironed her dress to be photographed. I imagine that in the 30s, some of these people had never been photographed before, and she ironed her dress, and she stood up. And these people were in their 80s, 90s, even into 100 years old. My husband says hard work helps you live longer. So, the body is made to work. So that, because it's kind of ironic that some of them died, like just coming across the ocean, and others lived to be into their hundreds. But anyway, she stood up all day in her dress because she didn't want her dress wrinkled before the photographer came. And there was another story about a woman whose husband had escaped from the plantation but would sneak back on to bring her things that she needed that he was able to acquire. And one day he came, and the slave master was talking to his wife and said, if your husband doesn't turn himself in, I'm gonna whip you. And her husband, being the good husband, turned himself in. And of course, everybody was whipped and punished. But the thing of it is that this is a man who had a wife that he cared more about than his own freedom. And so he gave it up. Okay, I'm supposed to, so you've seen my constructions. I started making sculptures actually when I was in a car with this sculptor named Richard Hunt, who is a very prolific artist. I'm not sure if he probably has something up here too, because he has sculptures everywhere, all over the country. If you come to Chicago, you go to Midway Airport, you'll see Richard Hunt sculpture. If you go to LaSalle Street, you see Richard Hunt sculpture. If you go to the Cultural Center in Chicago, there's a huge Richard Hunt sculpture there. So anyway, I was talking to him and said, I really envy sculptors. I wish I could do sculpture. And he said, just do it. So I did. But what my MO is that I've always been from these traditional paintings of slavery survivors to other traditional sort of portrait painting. I've also expanded my practice into creating sculptural pieces that are 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. And basically I call some of them retro racing Picasso, because it was very difficult for Picasso to admit that he was influenced by African art. But when he did Les Demoiselles d'Avignon in 1906 or 7, he was influenced by African art, and now you can read it in books. You can actually read it in a history book. Norman Mailer wrote a book about him too, and he talked about that. But the concept was that people of African descent were lesser. There was this weird science thing they had going on. Some people didn't believe that the Benin in Nigeria created the metals cast sculptures that they did because they couldn't be smart enough to do it. And so what we know is that the influences of African culture have been Art Deco. Aaron Douglas, I think, who's an African-American artist, was the one who started creating those geometric forms. And also, they came out of Egypt. Even though a lot of people seem to think Egypt is no longer in Africa, it is still there. It's still in Africa. But so my work is influenced by a lot of things, by what I read, by what I care about, and I guess you can tell that I care about how people perceive people of African descent. And then the other science is that we all came from Africa. The oldest living skeletal remains were found in Africa so far. That's the oldest ones that have been found. So, and it makes sense if you read the Bible, and if you wonder where's the Garden of Eden, it has to be. Where would Adam and Eve evolve from? A place where they didn't need to have clothes, because if it was Antarctica, they would be dead, right? A place where there was probably abundance of food, a place that was conducive to people living with nothing, with no housing, with no fire, with no, with nothing. So I know I didn't talk enough about my work, but you'll get a chance to ask us questions, so I'm going to sit down and be quiet. And, and thank you again for coming. I hope you could follow some of what I was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. That was the shortest time I've spent with you. We call on the phone and we'll talk for an hour and then realize we got to die. This is great, and it's all good stuff. So anyway, thank you very much. And next we have Charly. Will come up and give his take on things. So, and this is a new old friend. I feel like I've known Charly for a long time, but we also just met yesterday. So, welcome.
I'm actually going to use my phone, so I'll look at the 10 minutes and try to be as exact as possible. I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and I want to thank Joyce for giving me a call and letting me know about this opportunity. It's always kind of nice. I don't know if my bio is available anywhere, but I was born in Alabama, but I was raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so after I completed high school, I went to Chicago, where I went to the Art Institute of Chicago and then the American Academy of Art, where I got my degree. I worked 20 years as an illustrator and designer in commercial advertising agencies, but at the same time was always trying to figure out what my voice would be. And so I've been making a living for the last 18 years as a fine artist. What you see behind you, or behind me, I'm sorry, is my studio. That's the studio space that I currently work in. And I'm actually sitting on my couch shooting the wall. And the cool thing about that wall, it's an old church and private school that was converted to artist loft. And I was one of the last artists to get over there. And when I got there, they had just started working on my studio. And when I saw that wall, I asked them to scrape what peeling paint was coming off and leave the rest of it just the way it was, and I would prime it because it was an art statement. And so that's the wall that I actually have been painting on a lot lately because I've been working larger scale. And so I'll mount something to that wall and paint there as opposed to, I have a couple of easels in that spot as well. But my work, someone was asking me last night, like what exactly I do. And I don't know if I can really describe it because I'm kind of all over the place. The one thing that is very significant in pretty much everything that I do is I'm making a black statement, but it's a black statement simply because I'm an African American. And so whatever I'm painting, even if it's a still life, it's going to have a flavor that speaks about my background and who I am. But I actually make a living, and I just thought about it as we were sitting here. Being from Wisconsin, I got a call a year ago from the Green Bay Packers. They were expanding their private booths, and they wanted me to do some paintings, and I was thrilled. They said they wanted a Wisconsin artist, and I'm like, I haven't lived in Wisconsin in 22 years, but okay. And then it was like one of those kind of things. It's like literally it was a dream come true project, and I knew it was going to be a challenge to negotiate because I would have really almost done it for free, as long as I could paint what I wanted to paint. And my experience with that whole project was, again, like I knew my brothers who are huge Packer fans would be thrilled for me. When they did the unveiling about a month and a half ago, I was able to invite my whole family there for them to look at the work. But I think one of the huge highlights for me, being a Green Bay Packer fan growing up, which was really difficult, because when I started paying attention to sports in the Packers, they were sucking. You know, we always call it, Packer fans call it the lean years, because, you know, Lombardi made an incredible team, but when I'm 7, 8 years old, which is 68 and then 69, it was when they started to lose more and more. And Lombardi actually, a lot of people don't even know Lombardi went to Washington, D.C. for a year. And when he passed away, he was coaching there. But he left a legacy. But, like when I grew up and started paying attention, one of my heroes for the team was a guy by the name of John Brockington, who was a running back, number 42. And so I did the project, and they asked me, like, what's your wish list as far as what paintings you want to do? And I said, I want to do retired jerseys. I want to do running backs. I want to do quarterbacks. I just put a list out there, like, what will I get? They'll probably give me, because they hired 10 artists, painters, and about 12 photographers. And they came back with all of those, and in addition, the Super Bowl rings. So I did the 4 Super Bowl rings. But anyway, after the unveiling, my family was just proud and excited. And so when it was done, I get back to my house, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I see an email, and the email says Jay Brockington. And so I'm thinking, like, this is kind of interesting. Let me see what this is. So I open it up, and it's a letter from John Brockington saying that he was truly honored that I did a painting of him. And I felt like a kid all over again. I'm like, I can't believe John Brockington is thanking me. And it's like, I immediately sent it to my brothers and sisters and say, look, John Brockington is thanking me. And he said, I'm going to be in Wisconsin at Lambeau Field next week. And he said, would it be okay if I take a photograph in front of your painting? And I was like, that's so crazy, because I was going to ask him, will you take a photograph in front of my painting and send it to me? So I say all that to say that I am fortunate and blessed to make a living as an artist, but my journey goes all over the place. The Green Bay Packer project, I'll be working for the Milwaukee Bucks because they're building a new stadium, and I'll be doing a couple of paintings for that. But sports is one of my loves. So to paint, especially old school, some of the athletes that did it just for the joy of being an athlete and playing for a team, as opposed to a lot of them that are after the money now, which I can't blame them for, but it is what it is. But I make a living there, and then last year I also had an opportunity to do something that I've always loved. I've always been a collector of children's books. There's a book called A Snowy Day that I fell in love with when I was maybe 5 years old, and the reason I did was because the images was of a black child in New York, and he looked like me. Keys was the painter, altar of the piece, and the mother looked like my mom. She was heavy set and round and brown, and I couldn't read at the time, but I looked at this book over and over again. And so, and what's ironic about that is to come full circle and to see that book years later and see the textures and the patterns and the simplicity is pretty much what I do. And so not from a conscious level, from a self-conscious level, it influenced what I did from that day on. Well, anyway, I got a call from a major publisher saying, we've seen your work before and we think you'd be great for children's books. And I came with one stipulation. I said, I would do a children's book because I've always wanted to, but they would have to be black children. They would have to be black images because there's not enough of those out there. Even 50 years after seeing A Snowy Day, there's still not enough of that. And so I had an opportunity to do that, and now I have an agent. And that, again, is my only stipulation. I need to see more of our representation out there. So I make a living doing children's books, doing sports illustration, and then these are most of the works you see on the wall here. Let me see how much time I have. Are we good? All right, I think I have about 4 more minutes. So I do personal works on the side. I do sell my works that way. But what's happened in Atlanta is Atlanta has become the hub. And in fact, there was an article recently that said that there are more television shows and movies being produced in Atlanta than in Hollywood now. And what happens, and I've always paid attention to this, every scene, every set needs a piece of work on the wall, paintings, photographs, or something. And I've always looked at that, so I would love to kind of get involved with that. And in the last couple of years, there have been more and more production studios coming to me and saying, would you like to be in these programs, these movies, or these shows? And what's kind of interesting about that is that I don't work for free. Hollywood and a lot of production companies will come to you and say, you're going to get a lot of exposure. A lot of people will see your work. You could become famous. I'm like, I'm a businessman, and being that I'm an artist and a businessman, I recognize exposure can't pay my bills. And so I've gotten to a point now where I make it very clear, some of these movies may have, like, for example, the whole Marvel series is shot right around the corner from where I live. And so Spider-Man, Ant-Man, the Civil War, and those budgets start at $100 million. Surely you have a little bit of money for art. And so, and then I'll throw numbers out there. Now I have a very clear number of what they'll pay for it. But what I love about that industry is they are borrowing the work. They will take the work, they will frame the work, they will show the work, and they will return the work to you and pay for it. So you can't beat that deal. So you'll see a couple of pieces. Even here, you'll see like a French horn on the studio wall, a piano, and a violin. Those pieces are specifically done for that clientele. But I have 1 minute left, so real quickly, I want to show you. This work is almost completed. It's a series called In My Head, and it explores just the struggles of everyday thought and some of the things that are going on in our heads. But on the left side of her is a statue. The statue came from the lobby of the Palmer House in Chicago. My parents used to go to the Palmer House, they're both deceased now, every year and spend a weekend there. And so we as young people would tear up the house and have a lot of fun. But that was their spot. So last year I decided to go see Hamilton in Chicago. And while I was there, I stayed at the Palmer House. I saw this and it spoke to me. So when I saw that beautiful statue with the candles, I created that piece to incorporate it into the piece that I already started. This is a personal piece. And then this piece is called She Americana. Memorabilia that deals with a lot of racism in the country. Mammies and pickaninnies and all these derogatory things are surprisingly called Black Americana. And so I've always loved the organic feeling of floral arrangements. So I incorporated it into a beautiful little girl and kind of telling that story, but also telling the story in the lower area in black and white of just how beautiful and how much I absolutely love Black children. And so it's got the little kids in the choir, but it's got this, again, beautiful arrangement of flowers, but the conflict of these images that have softer turns, but the reality is they're still negative images. I'm not going to use up any more time here. Again, I guess we'll be answering questions. I will say that it is a pleasure showing with these two incredible artists. And thank you, Daniel, for making that happen. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Charlie. That was great. And so last but certainly not least is Jake Webster, somebody I just met 20 years ago. So we're actually, all these years, we're actually getting to know each other a lot more, which is great. So he will also be at the reception during the musical break. Jake will do a little spoken word, so do pay attention and do that. So anyway, my old new friend, Mr. Jake Webster, thank you.
You know, it's funny because we think the world is so big and the art world is just a part of that world, which is so small. We get to go all over the world, but there is nothing like getting 2 or 3 artists together in a place that they can sit down and talk and have you ask questions. Now, the only reason that I was last, anybody that need to go to the bathroom, this is the time to go. Okay? Because I see quite a few people out there look like you're my age. And when it's bathroom time, it's bathroom time. So don't make me wait. I have to go now. But this is what I love. Thanks, Promega. And I really mean thank Promega for giving me this opportunity to come and be with you. And Stephanie Shade and put me on every deadline an artist can be on, and I think I made every one. And I just think, so there won't be no misunderstanding. Surely, 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 Lord, I wonder, do you get the blues the way I do? Now, Joyce, As a college teacher, she gave you a lecture. My friend Charly, he's all over the place, so he entertained. I just want you to know, if you have any question about sex, race, or religion, ask me. Not necessarily in that order, but ask me. And I promise you, I won't lie to you. This piece, because of my friend Naganda, we both agreed to do a mother and child. Because when you're black and work abstractly, they always say, well, you're trying to be African, or you're trying to be African-like. And I just want white folks to know that I make abstract art because it is my ancestral heritage, and because that damn sister Dorothy worked the shit out of me in art history at Mississippi Valley State University. So I come to abstraction from my academic training and my ancestral heritage. Give me something else up there, Miss Stephanie. Flip me, Stephanie. There we go. So when I get up, I want folks to know one thing. I love my job. My bio say, I was born and raised in Mississippi. I was educated in Mississippi. And I took my black ass all over the world to learn what I needed to know about art. So I've been arguing with white folks all of my life. I've been arguing with black folks all of my life because everybody wants to tell me what to do. And boy, that's a bad mistake. So now, you can stop me at any time and ask us any questions, because you see the three of us love to talk, but I like to make this interactive. So stop me anytime, just do this. I can't see that far back there. If you're on the back there, I can't see, but y'all help me out. It's say, black aesthetics. And this is what got me when I first moved to South Bend from Mississippi. I taught middle school. Nobody remembers me as a school teacher. Nobody but the kids I taught. And there was one college professor, because white folks say I was black and I didn't make art. And I had just came back from those marble quarries in Pietrasanta that changed my life. I left my paintbrushes at JFK in the trash can. And when I got to South Bend, Indiana, all I wanted to do was sculpt and had never carved nothing in my life. But those marble quarries done something to me. And there, I started to read about Barbara Hepworth. So when you look at my work and think I'm influenced by Picasso or Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth. And if you push me enough, I can show you the pieces that I stole from. And why did Barbara have such an effect on me? She and Henry Moore went down to the south of France to visit Picasso. And like good men do, they ignored the hell out of her. So Picasso and Henry Moore talked about sculpting and what they were doing and how they were doing it. And 6 hours later, they said, "Oh, Barbara, what are you doing? What about you, Barbara?" She knew time was short. So she said, let me tell you all something. I just put a hole in a piece of marble, and it was better than having an orgasm. Everything I do, I put a hole in it because of Barbara Hepworth. Plus, whatever it is, it becomes abstract real quick once you put a hole in it. At this point, I take good wood, I take bad wood, and I sculpt. And because somebody told my mother when I was a kid that I was math-minded, my mother challenged me. She said, if you go to college and major in math, we'll mortgage the house. But if you go and major in that shit called art, you own your own. And to me, that was a perfectly good challenge. And I said, I got you, Mom. I got you. And then this is what I do. Now, why do I do this? Because coming from Mississippi, we went from slavery to Jim Crow. And I don't want white folks to be embarrassed or ashamed to talk about slavery or Jim Crow around me. You see? Because I want you to know somebody survived. Somebody survived. Now listen to this. And when they say, is there a black aesthetics? We acknowledge that in every profession except painting and sculpture. Why? Because black artists don't go around defending themselves. Black historians don't go around defending us. And the social scientists have no idea what in the hell I'm talking about. Now listen at this. Black painters and sculptors are devoid of existence. Academics say our ancestral heritage doesn't matter when you paint or sculpt. Where you come from doesn't matter. Where you live don't matter. Where you come from doesn't influence. Where you live don't influence when you paint or sculpt. Black aesthetics. We do give credit about this influence in black culture when we talk music, when we talk literature, when we talk black intellectual. And there were 2 or 3. And Ms. Joyce, I think you fit in that category. Black aesthetics, black painters and sculptors know of so little recognition. The question that are often asked, what color is this black aesthetic? What sound does this black aesthetic make? How do you measure this black aesthetics? How does the rhythm move in this black aesthetic? Look at me. Ain't I got rhythm? Sometimes we seem to forget the glorious past from whence we come. Sometimes we seem to forget that wonderful dialect. I don't speak English, I communicate through English. So whenever you want to correct my subject and verb, do that. Let me thank you out loud. Don't make me ignore my grandmother's teaching. You hear me? Love you. Now ask me some questions. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
What is that piece called? How do you name your pieces?
That's either protecting mother, protecting father, or family something, because that's why I name all my pieces. Everything I do is about family. And when I speak about family, It has no race. It has no economic status, because I think mothers, whether you're white, black, brown, yellow, green, I think mothers just love their children. Good, bad, or indifferent, mothers just love their kids. My baby boy died a couple of years ago in a motorcycle accident. And I know the time that boy could pick that big old bike up and go down the street on one wheel, grinning from ear to ear, and get up there by me and sit it down, and I would thump my chest and say, "Look at my boy." And his mother was sitting in the corner going, "Oh my God." That's what mothers do. And so this is when I teach young kids, love your mother. I don't care how you treat your daddy. Yes, ma'am. Now, it has a name, and right now I couldn't tell you. Stephanie, give me something else. And this is part of the same series. And I always do, when I work in series format, I always do one piece that's art, because I've been art all of my life. And I love being art. You know, I love being art. Anybody, ask any questions for any of us now? Any of us? Yes?
I have a question for Joyce. You made a transition from painting to three-dimensional work. How did you do that transition?
Okay, this is hot now? Okay, good. So when I got out of school, you know, you go to college and people are always telling you what to do. Your professors think they know what you should do. People would tell me, well, if I were you, I'd do this, you know, in your painting and that in your painting, when I was at Yale. And I said, well, if you want to do this or that in the painting, then why don't you make your own painting? And I'm doing this and that in my painting. So one of the things that I really wanted to do when I was no longer a college student was I wanted to throw out all the stuff that they had taught me. So I forgot, I was talking so much I forgot to transition the slide, so I didn't show you more work. But I started intentionally manipulating canvas. Like I would put folds in the canvas that we were taught in school, absolutely you should be able to thump that canvas when it's stretched like a drum. And I decided to put folds and imperfections that for me started to represent life's ups and downs, and you know, but that you can still, you know, manipulate or maneuver even in rough ground or rough times. So you can still have something, you can end up with something beautiful and something. So I started with the canvas, and then eventually I started making constructions. And I like to use found materials, and sometimes I cut up stuff too that and I transition materials that I don't, that aren't usually used for art, maybe, you know. But my overall goal was, as an artist, I tell people part of being an artist is hopefully, or the major part of being an artist is that you're supposed to be creative. You know, and for me, I get bored doing the same thing over and over again. So like Jake, the three of us have so much in common, it's ridiculous. But like Jake, I work in series. So my theory, if one is good, more is better. So the slavery survivor spirits that I showed you, I don't know how many I've done of them. I've done various numbers of various, you know, series. But with the sculpture, it was just something that I wanted to do. I'm like, why can't I make sculpture? Well, because I never learned how to make sculpture. And when Richard Hunt said to me, just do it, I just had to figure out a way to do it. So over time, it's, as a matter of fact, I showed one of my retro racing Picassos at an auction at the DuSable Museum of African American History, which is the first African American history museum in the country, created by Margaret Burroughs. And this woman, who was a docent at the Art Institute, bought the piece. And she said, I had to buy it because there's a piece by Picasso at the Art Institute that I love, and I see it every, when I'm volunteering as a docent, I see it all the time. And my husband and I know that we couldn't afford to buy, we wouldn't be able to buy the Picasso. Museum pieces are not for sale. But your piece, we love it, so we're buying it because, it reminded her of Picasso. And all I want to do with that series is to remind everybody where Picasso got his mojo, so. So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
I had a question for Charly. I was looking at that beautiful baptismal painting you did out there with your lucid, warm, and cool colors and the light and capturing time in a moment. I just wondered, do you paint from memories or from photographs or models or a combination of all those?
That's a very good question. Do I paint from memory or models and everything? In fact, one of the things when I teach that I emphasize is having a reference point. I paint from photographs, but I use it only as a reference point. And when I do so, I prefer to work from black and white. So I'll get black and white photographs of whatever I need, and then it'll allow me to interpret the color any way I want to. But I always use photographs. And I think, like, when you talk about the similarities and everything, the slave series, the slave narratives, I did a whole series early on based on like listening to the audio, because there are audio interviews and there's written interviews and there's all these great photographs, and it was the same thing. I was moved to tell that story. So like a lot of things, I think we are influenced by a lot of different things. And even with that series, and same thing, the photographs that we work from were black and white photographs. You'll see the vivid color in both of our interpretation of it, but we are working from black and white photographs. Yes.
I have a question for each of you. This is for the group. What was the role of art in your lives growing up? Did you have artistic family? Did you visit museums? How did you come to love art and become artists?
I got into
Mike.
It's on.
Okay. Y'all have to help me come into the 21st century, okay? Bear with me. I got into art. First grade, I wanted to know who wrote the book, who drew the pictures. See Spot run, run Spot run. Jane jumped high. That was fascinating to me. And so just by reading and writing influenced me. And I was a serious painter until I got to Pietrasanta, Italy. And Father Tom and I went up into the marble quarry, and they hew out a wall of marble as big as a city block in New York. I wet my pants because I thought it was an earthquake. Everybody ran away from me, but nobody laughed, because they knew that was my first time in a quarry. And so by the time I got to JFK, I lightened my load. So that's how my parents hated art, because they didn't know nobody that made a living as an artist. And they didn't think I was going to be the first, and they're almost right.
There's a large piece on the second level of the Beatles, and I was going to originally title that piece Full Circle, because the very first time I started drawing was in '64 when the Beatles came to America for the first time. I was absolutely in love with them. I didn't think I could sing or anything, but I just liked the way they looked, the way they dressed, the way they sound, and I didn't know how to express that, so I got paper and then I got pencil and I started drawing them. I loved their boots, their suits, their hair, everything about it. So I drew Beatles over and over again. I regret that at the time my mother saw no value in it, so she kept none of the drawings, and I didn't see any value in it. I was just drawing, and so I drew a lot. So I knew that I started drawing at 4 years old, and so that piece is the first piece I've ever done of the Beatles 53 years later or something. But it was coming full circle with what inspired me to create in the first place. It was my way of expressing a feeling, and it was something, you know, it was on pencil, but it was on paper, but I think that's where it started for me.
Well, for me, I do come from a creative family. My mother was an opera singer. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see my mother preparing to sing, and Marian Anderson's behind her, looking annoyed. But because Marian Anderson was a mezzo soprano, my mother was a lyric soprano. She actually was a coloratura, but she felt that she was too big at 5'7" to be a coloratura, so she trained her voice to be a lyric. She sang with the Philadelphia Orchestra Choir. She sang with Duke Ellington. She sang with, you know, gubernatorial inaugurations and stuff like that. We weren't rich. Don't think that we had money because of that. She had a full-time job, and she was also divorced. She was very talented at getting husbands. She had, she told me, if you can get one, you can get another one. But, she was also a writer. She wrote letters to the editor. She read everything, every newspaper in Philadelphia and periodicals and stuff. So we all became readers as a result of living with her. The thing I attribute to me becoming a visual artist, I don't know. They were mostly musicians. My grandfather was a pianist and taught my uncle, who was a jazz musician, to play the piano. My other uncle was a photographer that we didn't think was really art at the time, you know. So he has between 400,000 and 800,000 negatives in the archived in the African American Museum in Philadelphia. And if you look up the Selma to Montgomery, he documented the civil rights movement, and CBS International used his photographs for the anniversary. So I don't know. All I know is what I did with our kids is I gave them free time. Because my mother had a full-time job to support her children when she was between her divorces. She had a full-time job. She also traveled a lot for singing. She was a paid soloist in New York at church, I always forget the name, a big church in New York. So she was gone a lot. So I had a lot of free time. And I think giving children free time, it allows their creativity to blossom. And I just, she said when I was 5, I did some dancing figures, and she showed them to one of her friends to say, what should I do? And they said, well, if your daughter is 5, and if she drew these figures, you need to put her in an art class, which my mother didn't do. So I don't know. I sang, I danced, I did all kinds of stuff, but I always went back to art. And then when I got to high school, you could have an academic major as an additional course, your basic math, science, language, etc. And then you can, in addition to that, stay an extra period and take art every day. And so that's what I did. And then I became the art editor in high school, and then I went to Howard. I became the art editor of the literary publication. I also was the Whiffenpoofs. I didn't know they really existed. The Whiffenpoofs showed up at my studio, the singing group at Yale. They showed up at my studio and hired me to do something for them. So I always say, we go to art school. We don't really need to go to art school. Somebody says go to art school. We're all really self-taught, because that's why our art is so different. Even though we all went to art school, we all gravitated towards the things that we wanted. I think maybe you learn more art history in art school, I don't know. But, and you take drawing, but everybody who went to art school is not an artist. Everybody, I know people who went to art school who are lawyers and not artists, so that's a good question. There's a whole lot that goes into becoming creative. And the other thing that for me is that I love to work. I decided to tell myself that work is good. So if you work a lot, that's good. I'm not interested in vacations. You ask my husband. I'm not interested in vacations. I always have art materials with me so that I have stuff. I brought stuff here so I could draw. So.
Well, that's great. As I went to art school and learned I wasn't going to be an artist, so that is a testament to that. Really is. So I'm glad that I didn't, because this is what I do in the art world. So I'm really proud of that. But thank you all very much, and thank to the three of you. It's been fantastic working with you, and go out and enjoy the art. And Tony Castaneda is going to supply some music for us out there. And then I'd say at the break, Jake will be doing a little spoken word. And Jake also has a few books out there for sale of his poetry. So they are out by the reception desk. So enjoy, and thank you for coming. This arts program got started when the building was still under construction, and it was Bill Linton, president of Promega Corporation, brought me in to here, and I think the idea was to talk about art in the space, and I think the original concept was to decorate. So why don't we think about, changing exhibitions? The whole mission statement of the building is community participation. So why don't we not think of that as decoration, and in turn do changing exhibitions?
I took a trip to Italy in 1974, and I got fascinated with marble and moved to Indiana, and no marble, but plenty wood and plenty limestone. So I've been carving wood and stone ever since, although it took me a period to learn how to operate the tools, because they're different than paintbrushes. And picked up a log and a set of carpenter's chisels. I didn't even know there was such thing as wood carver's chisel. By the time I discovered the wood sculpture chisel, man, I was off and running. And I always liked to work big, and wood became the perfect medium because I could work on 15-foot pieces, 10-foot pieces, and I could move them by myself. If that was stone, I wouldn't have been able to move them. The biggest piece I ever worked on weighed about 3 tons.
Where does the art come from? Does it come from your brain?
It comes from my mind, but it also comes from things you say or don't say. It can come from an attitude. It can come from something we are doing or something we are not doing. Creativity is just there, and so I don't fight it. I always have something to do, and I'm always doing something. So I'm never bored because I really, 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 really love what I do. And if you don't like it, good. I owe you no explanation. My problem starts when you say you like it. Then I got to explain something to you.
You have to have a dream, you have to have imagination. I always have questions. I have more questions, I think, than anybody I know. And I sometimes annoy people with my many questions. But I have questions, and the art helps me to create answers or possibilities. They're not necessarily the end answer, but it's usually a path. I like a challenge, so for me, doing something that I haven't done before is probably my favorite thing to do. My undergraduate degree and my graduate degrees are in painting, and I'm doing sculpture now. So, as well as painting, I still do painting, and I even adding things like collage to my work was something that I didn't initially do, and now I do that a lot. So it's always evolving. The initial impetus for making art is my heart. Something moves me, and it makes me want to express my feelings about how it moves me. When I first started doing paintings of slaves, one of my friends, one of my collectors, called me up crying. And he said, "I saw your pieces. They are so moving." And people would say to me, "How do you get them to look like that?" And the way I get them to look like that is because that's how I feel about them. So there's a large emotional component to making art.
Art chose me. and I couldn't see myself doing anything else. I spend countless hours every day, not a 9 to 5, but 7-8 hours a day creating something new. And I can see how like often artists can get like they get to a point where they really are like egomaniacs because they really do think it's about them. They really do think that this magic that happens on this blank canvas that is created is all about them. But as an artist, for me, I recognize that I am only a vessel, that I've been chosen to create. And when I recognize that, then what comes out of me is greater than anything this individual can create. But it's not a choice, it was something that chose me. There's a really great quote by John F. Kennedy that talks about, in order to get an idea of a civilization, look at its art. And I think very much that is our responsibility. I'm gonna take that back. That's my responsibility, not every artist's responsibility. Some artists simply paint pretty pictures, and there's nothing wrong with that. I want to paint something that's relevant and will be relevant 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. Something that's going to move you. And that's the other thing. I think the important thing about art is, for me, again, art is supposed to elicit a reaction. And we cannot be in charge of that reaction, meaning simply that sometimes the reaction will be negative. And I am so fine with somebody really getting angry or upset about something I've created. But for somebody to feel nothing is when I fail. It's important that you feel something. Ideally, I want you to love it. Ideally, I want you to buy the work. But you're not always going to feel that as long as you feel something.